So I'm delighted to introduce our moderator for this first panel. Her name is Meagan Crawford. She's an independent marketing and communications consultant with clients of all shapes and sizes, ranging from startups and multinational firms. Meagan has earned her MBA from Rice University with double concentrations in finance and entrepreneurship, and was a distinguished graduate in management and a summa cum laude honors student. She volunteers with many space-related organizations and has experience with NASA, and is excited to be instrumental in the development of this entirely new industry in the coming years. Take it away, Meagan.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope the excellent lunch didn't put too many of you to sleep. We have some interesting things to talk about for the next few minutes. I'm going to start by introducing our panelists. On the far left, you'll see Frank Mycroft. He's the Vice President of Strategy for Planetary Resources, the asteroid mining company, where he drives strategic thinking, manages special projects, and engages in partner and business development. He recently led the Kickstarter campaign that we talked about quite a bit at the boot camp, where they raised $1.5 million from 18,000 backers. In the middle is Amaresh. He's the founder and managing partner of Earth-2 Orbit, which is a global provider of satellite launch services. Amaresh also serves as a management consultant and financial advisor, and he is a principal of the Space Angels Network. And then here next to me is Tom Olson, founding partner of Exodus Consulting Group, providing independent due diligence and analytics for firms in the investment community that are considering plays in the emerging space sector. Tom is also a board member of the Space Frontier Foundation and the director of the wonderful NewSpace Business Plan competition that you guys all watched this morning. So the panel that we're doing this afternoon is about challenges to starting a space company, of which we know there are many. Of course, starting any company includes a lot of different challenges, but today we're going to talk about what specifically are the challenges that space companies have to overcome as opposed to other entrepreneurial ventures. So with that,
Start with that.
I'll let Frank get started.
So the overall question is, name some challenges in particular. It's a great question because there's so many to choose from. So I think one that people don't really appreciate is the need for, I'd say, more sophisticated business people in the space industry. So, we're all very passionate about space. There's a tremendous pool, I think, of engineering talent out there. But what we lack are a community of financiers who look at this from a less passion-oriented, more IRR, NPV, project-oriented way, and can take what can be great technologies and pair them with great business models, pair them with shorter time cycles, pair them with smaller capital needs in the near term to really generate interest. I think that's a big one. I think a second big one is actually just the word space. A lot of companies, the moment you say we're a space industry company, the money in the room gets quiet because they've been there before, or they associated it with very capital-intensive investments or with small markets. And so I think calling something the space industry is like calling something the Europe industry. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's a location. So focusing on calling what are you really doing? Are you a resource company? Are you a telecom company? Are you a transportation company? And positioning yourself not as a space company, but as a company that is actively serving a need that is based in what really human industry should become location.
I should completely agree, Frank. We probably should prep a little bit before the panel because he stole all my answers right there. But I think there's one fundamental obstacle, and it's not technology, it's not money, it's not economic or financing. I think the number one obstacle is actually the ability to communicate a quote-unquote space business in the terms of the application that it fulfills. And so it's kind of similar to what Frank was saying. And I think the industry has come a long way in doing this, but space is a place, like you said. But in the terms of the business that we're talking about, space is not a destination. It's purely an enabler to enhance existing business verticals, to make them faster, better, or cheaper. It's kind of like what the internet did, in which it revolutionized the way that we buy books every day, or revolutionized the way that we book airline tickets, or revolutionized the way that we get directions to find a parking lot at Stanford. It's basically the existing verticals are enhanced using this thing called space. And it's the articulation of what your business does in terms of the actual application that it drives at the end of the day. That is the fundamental obstacle. And that's what we actually worked on over the last couple of days in coaching. We're required, the 8 finalists that we saw this morning. It's getting away from the notion that this is a space company and more to the notion that the company that you're working on is particular to a certain vertical. And those verticals are numerous. I'll give you one last example. I always use the example of the internet. The internet industry is not really an industry per se. When you ask someone if they're in the internet, if they're in the internet space, there's usually an application behind the scenes that actually drives the making of money. A good example is the various applications you see on your iPhone, for example. Space is no different than that. And there are dozens of applications that each one of the companies we saw this morning will operate in. So it's basically the articulation of that, communication of that, the realization of who your actual customers and what application you're driving, and presenting that to partners, strategic partners, investors, financiers, potential customers in a concise way. So that's an easy obstacle to overcome. It's not technology, it's not financing. It's purely the realization of what application you're driving.
Well, kind of to speak kind of a little bit in parallel to what Amaresh just said, I'm discovering in my practice that some of the more successful startups in the area, whether it's space related or space scalable, seem to be the ones that can tell a story that uses space as a context as opposed to the be-all and end-all of a destination to try to do something up there. As an example, one of the firms I'm working with right now, they're called Zero-G Solutions. Now, it sounds like they're a space company. They're not a space company. They're a biotechnology company that happens to use space as their platform for doing business. And once they get to tell that story, it's very, very compelling. I started out in this I got into this a long time ago when I started getting excited about some commercial opportunities. And I went in and some people and I played with the notion of maybe starting an exchange traded fund or some other kind of way to help jumpstart some of these things. And then over time, we actually started going to all the conferences and looking under the hood at a lot of these startup companies that were trying to pitch their wares and realized, well, most of them either they're just PowerPoint slide companies, or they're full of just great technologists and very little in the way of practical business sense. And it was mentioned by the keynote speaker, Professor Hubbard, earlier today. It's just an amount of they start talking about put up hockey stick charts and they talk about it's only 2 years away. I've been hearing 2 years away for 16 years now. It's still 2 years away. Even people that we all expected would get going a lot sooner have found bumps in the road, and nothing is certain in that area. But the biggest challenge came to me later on when we started, Amaresh and I worked together on the Space Investment Summit series, and when I was trying to get some of the people on my list to at least come and attend and look at what's going on in this industry, investor type people in particular, a lot of them said, push back, saying the same thing. Space, that's too rich for my blood. Because all we talked about up to that point was launch. Commercial launch, tourism opportunities, building out spaceport infrastructure. Those were the themes that dominated every conference and meeting that everybody had. And launch is an important problem to solve, but it's only one of 1,000 problems that we need to solve if we're going to become a multi-planet species. The good news is, that's what entrepreneurs do all day long. They solve problems in a way that establishes market value. So I went back with a blank sheet of paper, started from the end goal, and then worked backwards and saying, okay, what are some of the problems? And what can we do to solve them? That's a term that evolved into something we now call space scalable, which is the idea of a company that's actually building a technology that's primarily built to enhance things here on Earth, but can be scaled to solve an important space problem down the road. And that opens the floodgates to things like nanotech, biotech, certain types of IT technology, radiation mitigation, and also could open the doors to greater interest by the general investment community, because they know now they don't need 100 million to play, that maybe 100,000 to get start in some of these areas.
I would build on that. I think that's spot on. And I mean, I love the example of planetary resources where I am. We are an asteroid mining company, so it is a very long-term proposition. Yet it is one that we know if we want to make it successful, we have to divide it into small chunks. We have to find the rungs in the ladder that are both of acceptable appetite to financiers and is valuable to customers. So you've got to say, what is that lowest rung that is technology that doesn't exist today, but is hardware I can start working on right now, that somebody will help pay for, that will extend the capital that I have to do more and more with a small amount. This also lets you stay really close to customers, right? I've got nothing against PowerPoint charts and nothing against going to conferences, but you've got to do the hard work too. You've got to show progress. That's what sets you apart. And the sooner you can do that, the sooner you can get to that first rung, you'll find yourself getting to the second rung, right? And as you're doing this, you very much have to prepare for contingencies, because particularly in the space industries, things don't go like you expect them to. And the ability to pivot quickly is what separates the ones that survive from the ones that don't.
I think just to add on that, there's a couple of great analogies I'll bring up in a bit around what you guys are doing, possibly other types of resources like the oil and gas industry, mining, and compressibility. But one big factor, one example I'd like to bring forth is the same obstacle that I brought up earlier. It's almost kind of a mental mindset within companies today. You have to come to the realization that you're actually not a space company, and that has to be almost, concretely in your mind and bred within the company as a whole. And that may sound very trivial, it may seem very simplistic, but it actually isn't. It affects what conferences you go to. It affects how you approach your investors. It affects what customers you approach. It affects who you seek money from. It affects how much money you seek. It affects how much money you spend on technology development. I would like to see a lot of the companies that presented today, this morning, also pitching in other business plan competitions like agriculture, oil and gas, communications, materials, because you're not just space companies. In fact, I would say you're not space companies at all. That's maybe a little bit drastic, but I truly believe that. I think that's the fundamental obstacle. Most of you have probably heard of skybox imaging. I don't know if anyone from Skybox is here. If you are, raise your hand before I talk about you. I guess not. But there, all right. Here's the real story. Skybox is not a. Oh, we're streaming live. That's right. It's
Hi, you're there.
Exactly.
I'm watching.
Email Tom with any complaints. Skybox is not a space company. Not at all. Forget the fact that they're about to launch 28, I think, satellites into orbit, spending tens of millions of dollars in doing that, having one of the most robust satellite constellations that any commercial company currently has. Forget all that. They're not a space company. They're not a satellite company. They're a data analytics company, deriving data for the oil and gas industry, deriving data for certain agricultural segments, deriving data for mapping and shipping companies. They go to conferences in the oil and gas industry, shipping industry, mapping industry. They're experts in agriculture, shipping, oil and gas, and the list goes on and on. They're not a space company. So push aside the fact that they're going to develop one of the most robust satellite constellations in the world. That's besides the point. Their true value is in all these verticals that they're approaching as far as how they pitch to customers, where they find their customers. And they've made that mindset leap very, very concretely, because the majority of employees they have are not satellite folks. They're data analytics and software folks in those verticals. So it's actually a great example. Other companies are doing the same as well. And that still to me is the fundamental obstacle.
So we talked a little bit about the investors and kind of, you know, how worried they are when you come to them and you say we're a space company, and how that immediately turns them off of the idea of investing. What, in your opinion, can be done besides changing the pitch to, you know, get rid of the word space wherever possible? But on the investor side, will success of companies like SpaceX help change some of those minds? What do you see in the future that's going to help kind of those investors eventually say that yes, they do want to invest in a space company?
Well, I wish I could have just a cut and dry solution where you just tick off these boxes here and you're certain that they're all going to listen to you. I think, again, using space more as context than as a destination makes it much easier to get into certain doors than otherwise. There's still a little, even though the SpaceX and now orbital successes are on the board for everyone to see, that's still a show that's being run by people with some very, very deep pockets. And the people that you're trying to reach for your early investment round don't have pockets anywhere near that deep usually. And they're looking for something they can get into and, you know, add a value somewhere in a vertical and then get out again in a reasonable amount of time. If you can demonstrate through both your technology and your team, because they're investing in a team that's going to, they think they can pull this off. You can show where the income streams are going to be coming from. You can demonstrate an ability to do that, and maybe you've done it in similar industries in the past. They're going to be more interested in looking at what you have, because they probably want to see at least a 3 to 5x exit in a reasonable amount of time. And depending on what kind of space company it is, you have various challenges to try to reach that mark.
Yeah, so I agree. I think you can do a couple things, right? You have to, one, you should be pursuing a big market. A lot of space companies are building a really cool widget, and there are customers that exist. But even if they accomplish everything they say, you know, it's a sub $10 million market, or it's a sub $100 million market. And unfortunately, it's small potatoes. It's the same thing that happens in the drug industry, and how you know, serious illnesses that are afflicting a small population just don't get solved, at least not with venture capital money. So find a big market, and then get in front of your customers as soon as you can. Don't be afraid to go out there, ask questions, listen more than you talk, and really understand, is there a true need for what you're offering? And if there isn't, be quick to fail and move on. Because there are needs out there in the resource, the telecom, the transportation industries that are located in space that you can address with some of these technologies. But you ask any successful entrepreneur, they will tell you how many times their businesses changed because their customers didn't want what they were initially creating. So yeah, get out there, and if you do that, I think you go to the investors and you can tell a story that is way more compelling than version 27 of PowerPoint, whatever. And so try to do more of that. It takes some guts, but it's worth it.
And by the way, I wasn't advocating kind of deleting the word space from your presentations, but it's more of a mindset shift.
I will.
Yeah. So space is not a bad thing. It's a good thing, and it's good to embrace it. But it's not good to define your entire company around it. That's kind of that's the distinction. So one analogy I can bring up is, say you're talking to an investor, if you articulate the market that you're operating in, what the end application or applications are, and you communicate to the investor that that end market and those applications are big now and growing into the future with very few obstacles, that's a rosy picture. And if you have a rosy picture in a big market, like Frank said, the space stuff doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't cause as much heartburn to customers, partners, and investors. It's kind of like back many, many years ago. Maybe I'll pose a question to the audience. I don't know if anyone would care to guess what industry has the largest capital-intensive projects, capital outlay, before revenue is actually realized? Someone say mining? Very close. Mining is up there. I think there's one more that kind of tops it out. Oil, exactly. Oil and gas. So some of the largest projects on this planet are huge. One example I have is, I think it's off the east coast of Russia, Sakhalin Island. 150 to 160 billion dollars of capital outlay before the first dollar or ruble was made. That's a lot of money. That can do a lot of damage in the space industry. But it didn't really matter because the market they were operating in had volumes and volumes of revenue potential. Now that's just one example. It's using a legacy industry. But there's many, many others. So space doesn't matter if the application and market are powerful. And that's kind of that's what we want to communicate to an investor. And once again, I kind of talk about the same exact obstacle, but I think that's the fundamental one.
And by the way, the oil and gas is a great example because when you have such a large capital requirement, the industry evolves to understand how to finance that. Right? It starts to segment the problem into preliminary prospecting and later stage prospecting and early stage development planning and then eventual extraction and refining. And there are different owners of each step and they each put in money at different times. They take money out at different times. And it takes what sounds impossible to fund and it makes it happen because there is an economic engine that is being created there. Space, you have to try to do the same thing, I think, once you start to get into those size of dollar amounts. It's certainly what we try to do at Planetary, and a lot of other companies try to do that too.
I think I would be remiss, I would ask you guys for examples too. We would be remiss if we didn't also say, what not to do. One of the things you should not do is define yourself by like one customer. If you're saying, well, we're going to build this great thing, and we're going to sell it to NASA, or we're going to sell it to the Defense Department, and you just like leave it sit there, it's going to sit there for a long, long time. The oxygen will just go out of the room before you need it. Ideally, you want something that gives you multiple customers. If the government can be a customer, that's fine. I wouldn't count on them for more than 20% of your business, though, personally. That's why I advise and counsel our clients. So make sure you have something that has multiple potential for lots of customers, not just here in the U.S., but around the world if you can. If you're not ITAR sensitive, the better chance you have to tell a more compelling story to a group of investors.
Yeah, I think what not to do, when I think about the things that space businesses typically forget to think about, they are barriers to entry. So what happens when player number 2 does the same thing as you're doing, and how are you strategically positioning yourself to be ready for that? Because look at any industry, and how many times does the first mover actually take the pot? It's not that often. And the second thing is going after the elephant in the room as opposed to trying to find the small niche first. So in aerospace, like in any industry, there are incumbents and they are big. And your business model is probably trying to disrupt them in some way. How are you going to do that in a way that they don't take notice? And then how are you going to slowly creep up and become the big company? You've got to realize that even if you've got a great idea and a great business model, there will be what I like to call antibodies. There will be, people, real people that don't like what you're doing because they get paid to do that less efficiently. And they're going to tell their bosses that they can't rely on you to do it as well as they can. And this will happen all over the place. So how are you going to deal with that? Very few space companies get to the point where they're thinking about that. And until you do, until you can tell that story with that level of depth, how you've thought about these different contingencies, I think investors will stay wary.
Gentlemen, I'm going to ask one more question, then we'll open it up to the audience. We've got a little over 15 minutes left, so I wanted to make sure that they have a chance to get some questions in. But obviously, the last 2 days that these 8 lucky finalist teams got to spend with you guys and the other coaches, you were able to help them, kind of overcome a lot of these obstacles. For the people in the room who didn't have that opportunity, can you guys maybe suggest some resources that would help them prepare themselves to, to have a better pitch, to have a better idea of how to get their business started in the real business world, not just the space industry?
I think we should talk to Amaresh.
Thanks for the plug. Well, as Joe spoke earlier, talking about the Space Angels Network, all of the 8 finalists we welcome to join the Space Angels Network. And then through that process, we help coach as well for the pitches that you do in front of our investors. That's an ongoing process that we help you with. That's one resource. There's another resource in the area as well, and I'm not sure if that any representatives are in the room, but it's the Silicon Valley Space Center. They also assist quite extensively in quote-unquote incubating companies and helping them along the way. And there's tons of online resources as well that talk about how to communicate effectively, not only to investors, but also to potential customers and partners, and how to tell your story effectively. That's very, very common. Any questions, feel free to talk to me afterwards. There's a few other Space Angels Network folks in the audience. A couple of our members are here as well, our investors, so feel free to approach any of them and get more advice as well.
If you just want to study at home, one of the best resources I found, and I still refer to him to this day, is Guy Kawasaki. Yes, and he's a local guy who also made good. He started out 30 years ago at Apple as a software evangelist, and learned a lot in the process as that whole industry got built up. And he's written several really great books on the subject. And he's always a good resource. He also has some stuff he offers for free online. But we also offer through the BPC website, we have links to Mr. Kawasaki's materials. There are literally templates for financials, for an executive summary, and for business planning. And we're going to get more of those on the BPC website. And for next year, we're going to find other online resources that we can offer applicants or potential applicants.
It's very easy to find these now, these resources online, which is fantastic for entrepreneurs. I don't think it's ever been this easy to really start getting into it, but and entrepreneurs tend to be really confident, passionate people, and you've got to acknowledge that you probably don't know how investors think. And so go find an article on how investors think. It's quite fascinating. I think once you do that, you'll probably change your pitch significantly.
Must be a blank article. just definitely. Right.
Okay, I'm gonna Sam, he had his hand up.
Yeah. Question for you guys. Question about. Anyways, question about marketing markets and creating a business that may not be rockets or robots or satellites, because for the most part, that's what seems a lot of the industry's been focused on forever. Do you see the possibility of non-space markets like markets of entertainment, manufacturing areas that have not traditionally been in space, they have like a little niche opening or possibly a division doing space activity, capitalizing space?
Yeah, I'm excited for it. I think every industry goes through a maturation phase where you start as all technologists, then you start to get business, finance people, and pretty soon you end up just being a marketing company, right? That's Procter & Gamble, it's your cereal is all marketing, right? Because we've had cereal for a long time. I'd love to see space get to that point. And I think it's starting to. I think if you actually go and ask the big incumbent aerospace companies, and I've done this, and because I went to business school and I was wondering, do you need business people, right? And they would say, yeah, increasingly so as the industry matures, and even marketing, right? And another example is Kickstarter was huge, marketing need for a lot of companies that are trying to do it. And then people are starting to think about ways to advertise in space, and I think that's actually one way to harness the passion people have latently, even if they're not your typical space nut. They still like to think about space, and you can leverage that in a marketing way, very creatively.
Do you think entrepreneurs have a chance taking that angle to space and have a main product or maybe.
I mean, have you seen the movie Gravity, right? I mean, that's right.
No, I completely agree. I think the canvas is blank, and there's many, many things that could be done relative to space. The analogy that was brought up this morning, Dennis, you brought up the railroad. I think that's very, very applicable. So the transcontinental railroad was first built. No one really envisioned the type of applications that would result based on the railroad. Pretty much everything flourished after the railroad came in. Another analogy is the Apple iPhone. Back in, whenever this thing was launched, I guess it was 02 or 03, who would have envisioned that there would be tens of thousands of applications now across every single vertical you could think of on this little machine? So that was not envisioned at the time. It was essentially a blank canvas, but what it did is provided a critical mass of users and developers across different industries that allowed creativity to flourish, in essence. So I think space and the infrastructure around it is actually very, very similar. We cannot predict today what the killer application will be in space 10 years from now. I highly doubt it. Like no one predicted 10 years ago that Facebook would be 1 billion plus users and the size it is today. I think that would be virtually impossible. If you did, you wouldn't be in this room, you'd be a billionaire doing something else. So, very good. Yeah, let's get that.
This is kind of a public policy question. In the oil and gas industry, for example, and I didn't know this until recently, there is a law, it's basically kind of a wildcatter's law, that wildcat operators drilling for oil basically have what we in the space world would call zero G, zero tax. They have no taxation for their risk. If they lose, but if they win, they don't have to pay any federal taxes on it. We as a group, ProSpace and Space Frontier Foundation, fought for that for years. Almost got it through Congress, but now the world's changed again, and we're in a new era. With the perception of risk-reward in space, what do you think the chances would be for us as a organization, as a ecosystem, to take this idea back to Congress for space for the new entrepreneurial world?
Gosh, how do I not make a joke about Congress right now?
Yes, they asked me if I run for Congress. I said, no, I spent all my life running from it. Problem with policy is as you know, it's like watching sausage being made. And it's, you just don't want to do it. You wait for the final result. Unfortunately, yeah, we have all these conflicting things. And the problem with trying to change policy, although we have had our successes over long periods of time, including the creation of ASD, that was a big one, which really opened up the floodgates for NewSpace launch companies to get easier licensing and have a lot more onerous traditional FAA regulations placed upon them, at least for a period of years until we get the launches into development and kind of see where things are. This doesn't happen very often, and one of the reasons is, quite frankly, in a political process, we're not a big enough lobby. When you're at the trough fighting a certain battle, you're fighting battles against all sorts of people who want to maintain their large entitlement programs or other types of programs, and they can put big money to bear, and it's become a money and lobbying process. And it's up to me. I would make the process of most lobbying, especially corporate lobbying, completely illegal. But because I think that really has distorted our public processes for way too many years. And it's the only way I can see where we can put some sanity back into that business. But the fact is, we're just too small and we're not loud enough in most cases to really have an effect. And one of our cases in point is the great commercial successes that are being had by Elon Musk and the people that work because they're spending a whole lot less money. They get a whole lot less money from COTS and from other budgets, but they're the ones that are the most public and delivering the most bang from the buck from anything else launch related that NASA's doing right now. A lot of people don't realize that the entire development cost for SpaceX from up through Falcon 9 and Dragon was only about $800 million, which is about 1/10 what was spent over a period of years on the Constellation program, where they later pulled the plug. But they're turning around and they're doing it again with the Senate launch system. So, ignoring, again, the mammals in the room who are actually doing great things on just about nothing. And we're not telling that story well enough.
Y'all have any closing remarks?
Closing remarks.
Well, just to close on that, space policy should be an easy win because it doesn't hurt anybody in many ways. Nobody's making money, so you're not losing money by changing policy right now. And boy, would you create a lot of economic incentive, and boy, would that do a lot of good for the U.S. But like Tom said, it's just small potatoes, and so we have to shout a lot louder. And we probably have to shout together a bit better, and there might be things we can do there.
I have no closing remarks, but just to comment on the same theme here. It would be a whole lot cooler if a space startup or a new space industry didn't have to deal with the government at all. And I think that is what we should strive for. Forget policy. And many industries do that already, right? So it's not like it's a new thing, that a new proposition. I would argue the oil and gas industry would survive fine without its numerous tax cuts. Agriculture would survive fine without its numerous subsidies. We don't need either. So forget Congress politely.
Thank you very much, John.
All right.